Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling digital tools for science inquiry.
It's a hot topic right now, that's for sure.
Yeah, especially with all the buzz around AI and ChatGPT being used in classrooms. But for this deep dive, we really want to get strategic about how we're using technology. It's not about just using tech for tech's sake, right?
Exactly. It's about figuring out how technology can support those specific learning goals we have for our students, particularly in science.
And I think this research paper we're looking at today, The Role of Digital Tools in Science Inquiry Courses, does a great job of laying that all out.
It really does. And something I found really interesting is how the authors point out that even something as simple as a chalkboard or a piece of paper, those are forms of technology too.
Oh, that's a good point. I like that.
Yeah, it's all about, like they say in the paper, choosing the right tool for the job. And sometimes that might mean sticking with those tried and true methods. But that being said,
Sometimes the right tool is the latest tech.
right. And it's important to remember that modern science education, it's not about just memorizing facts anymore, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's so much more than that. It's about developing those critical thinking skills, that problem solving, the ability to form hypotheses.
That's exactly what they're talking about in the paper when they talk about thinking intelligence, which I love that phrasing. It's not just about memorizing, it's about thinking like a scientist. And that's where these digital tools can really come into play.
Okay, so let's get into it. This paper outlines 4 powerful ways these digital tools can transform what we're doing in our science classrooms. So first up, it talks about using digital tools to really bring those real-world experiments to the next level.
Yeah, and it's so much more than just using a digital microscope or something like that. Think about it. Like you could have students use an app like Firefox, right?
Lilacs, okay.
It turns your smartphone into all sorts of scientific instruments. You could literally have your students measure G-forces on a roller coaster to learn about physics.
Wow, that's amazing. And talk about a memorable way to experience physics firsthand. I can only imagine the oohs and ahs you'd hear from them during that experiment. Okay, so we've got smartphones, but it goes even beyond that, right?
Oh, absolutely. For the more techie teachers and students out there, you've got things like Arduino. You can build like customized tools and instruments.
Okay, now you're getting a little too technical for me,
Oh,
but
really cool though.
I'm sure it is. But for those of us who aren't quite as comfortable with all the coding and programming, are there tools that make it a little less intimidating?
Oh, for sure. There are platforms like Scratch, for example, where you're basically using a visual programming language.
Oh, interesting. So you're not having to write out all that code from scratch.
Yeah, so it's way more accessible. It's a really great way to introduce those coding concepts, but in a really fun and engaging way.
Love it. But we do have to be careful, right? I mean, as amazing as all this is, we don't want students to become overly reliant on the technology.
Oh, 100%. We have to make sure they're still developing those fundamental science skills. They still need to know how to read a thermometer or use a graduated cylinder.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. Technology should be enhancing those skills, not replacing them.
Mm.
Okay, what about the second way that digital tools can really transform the science classroom?
Well, think about those static images and diagrams in textbooks. We can do so much more now. We're talking interactive visualizations here.
Ooh, I love a good visualization.
Yeah.
It's true, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but imagine what you could do with 1,000 moving interactive pictures.
Exactly. We can bring those really complex scientific concepts to life. Think about Tiny Bop's The Human Body app. Have you seen that one?
Oh, yeah. It's amazing. Isn't that the one where they can make the character eat an apple and then, well,
Yep, that's the one. But it's not just about that. It lets them zoom in and explore the human body. They can look at blood flow in 3D. They can even make the heartbeat faster by making the character run. It's very cool.
it's incredible how they can make something as complex as, like, the circulatory system, tangible and actually exciting for kids. Just to be clear, that's just one example of many out there, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's a whole universe of amazing educational apps out there just waiting to be discovered.
So we've talked about how we can use digital tools to boost those real-world experiments, and then also how we can use them to really dive into these interactive visualizations. What else is on the list? What other tricks do these tools have up their sleeves?
Hard to get this. How about being able to conduct experiments that would normally be impossible or too dangerous to do in a real classroom?
Okay, now you've really got my attention. Tell me more about these impossible experiments.
We're talking about virtual labs. What if students could simulate the process of evolution over thousands of years to really understand natural selection? Or, how about slowing down the speed of a wave on a string so they can actually study its properties in detail?
It sounds like science fiction.
I know, right? But it's not. These simulations already exist. There are tons of amazing platforms out there. You've probably heard of FEE interactive simulations.
I have. They're fantastic.
So good. They have a virtual circuit construction kit. Students can experiment with circuits without the risk of, electrocuting themselves.
That's a good point. I mean, why not just do the real thing? But when you put it that way, there are definitely some safety benefits to keeping it virtual.
Right. Not to mention, it just makes everything so much more efficient. Students can really zero in on those specific concepts and then easily manipulate the variables in a controlled environment.
And I imagine that can be really good for those students who might feel a bit anxious about messing up when they're doing a hands-on experiment.
Exactly. Taking away that fear of failure can really encourage them to explore and take risks.
Love that. But, I mean, even though virtual labs offer so much, it's important to acknowledge that there are some limitations, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You don't get that same tangible experience or the nuanced observations that come from doing the experiment yourself in the real world.
So it really is all about picking the right tool for the job and knowing what each approach brings to the table.
It's about moving beyond just using digital tools and really thinking about how they can help students actually think about science.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, this is where those modeling tools come in.
Modeling tools. All right, now I'm really interested. Tell me more.
Instead of just seeing ice melt, imagine if your students could use a simulation to see how those tiny particles are actually behaving during that change of state.
Wow, that's like giving them X-ray vision to see the building blocks of matter.
Exactly.
It reminds me of when I first started using PET simulations with my students. Talk about a game changer. It was amazing to finally be able to visualize these concepts that were so abstract before.
For sure, and it's that deeper level of understanding that's so powerful. Modeling tools really encourage that abstract thinking, and they also give students a safe space to test out their hypotheses.
Right, because the stakes aren't as high if they make a mistake.
Yeah.
They can just try again.
Exactly. And then ideally, we can take that learning and combine it with real-world experiments so they're getting the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. They can use those simulations to really deepen their understanding and then actually get their hands dirty, so to speak, with those real experiments. Now, I know we've covered a lot, and some of our listeners might be feeling a little overwhelmed, which is understandable. Any advice for them on how to even begin to navigate all of these digital tools?
Definitely. And it is easy to get caught up in all the exciting options out there, but the important thing to remember is that technology, it's just a tool.
Right. It's not a magic solution.
Exactly. No silver bullet here. So before you go and download every soil science app, you really have to think about your goals. What are those core concepts and skills you really want your students to walk away with? What kind of learning experience will be the most impactful for them?
It's all about being intentional.
Yeah.
You have to choose the tools that align with those goals. So in a way, we have to become curators of digital tools.
Yes, and don't be afraid to experiment a bit to see what works best for your students, because every classroom is different. What works for one group of students or in one specific lesson, it might totally fall flat in another.
That's such an important reminder. And it's okay to not have all the answers right away. It's a learning process for all of us. And, this deep dive, it's really just meant to be a starting point. We want to spark your curiosity, get you thinking about all the possibilities, because at the end of the day, we're not just teaching science content.
We're trying to nurture that love of learning.
Yes, we want them to be curious.
Exactly. And those digital tools can help us do that. They can empower students to become more curious, to be more independent in their learning, and to be better problem solvers.
We're basically giving them a whole new toolbox to explore the world around them.
And that is incredibly powerful.
It really is. And, all of this ties into that final point from the paper, which is really about shifting our mindset about what's possible with these tools.
It's a whole new world out there.
It is. And this paper, it gives us a glimpse into what that world could look like. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, we're not just making learning more fun with these tools, although, that's always a good thing, right?
Of course.
But we're actually changing how students engage with science on a much deeper level.
Totally. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's not about the technology itself, it's how we're using it. It's about giving them the tools they need to think like scientists.
Yes. Curious, observant, asking questions, searching for those answers. That's what we want to see in our students.
Absolutely.
So, for example, instead of just, listening to their teacher talk about the phases of the moon, what if they could use a digital planetarium app to actually explore the solar system? They could track those phases over time. They could build their own models to explain what they're seeing.
That's such a good example. It really highlights that active learning piece, right?
Exactly.
Because when students go from just passively listening or reading to actually doing, that's when the real learning happens.
100%. It's like the difference between reading about a scientific discovery
Yeah,
and feeling like you're part of the team that made the discovery.
exactly.
Now, for any of our listeners who are just getting started with all of this,
Yeah.
it can feel like a lot, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So for those listeners, what advice would you give them? Where do they even begin?
You know, I always tell people, start small. You don't have to change everything all at once. Maybe just pick one concept, one skill, one lesson even, where you think those digital tools could really make a difference and just experiment. See what happens.
I love that. And there are so many great free resources available now, so you don't even have to spend a lot of money to get started.
And don't be afraid to learn alongside your students.
Oh, that is so important.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like they're the ones teaching us, right?
All the time.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today's deep dive into digital tools for science inquiry. Hopefully you're feeling inspired and ready to go out there and explore.
It's been so fun.
It has. And for all of you listening, keep those minds curious, and as always, happy exploring.